Do you want me to start or?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the JCI Europe Equality and Diversity Taskforce 10th Empowerment Programs webinar. We are glad to introduce Þórður Kristinsson from Iceland, who is going to teach us more about is there hope for men when masculinity hurts? So over to you.
Oh, thanks, Rike. Just a few quick words of introduction. I'm a teacher at a local college here in Iceland called Kvennaskólann í Reykjavík. And we just found out that Rike used to be my student. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago. And for the last years, I've also been a guest lecturer at the University of Iceland, the University of Akureyri, and the Gender Equality Studies and Training Program, or GROW Guest, which is a part of the UNESCO Educational Network. In my teaching, I focus on gender research, equality in a broad manner, and the inclusion of men in equality work. I've also worked on different research projects on men and masculinity since 2003. For example, with a focus on men in female-dominated professions, on men's sexual health, and now finally I'm working on my PhD with a research on the role of social media in shaping the relations and self-image of teens, with a special focus on the gendered aspects that are at work there. But today we're going to talk about if there is hope for men, and we're going to see what happens when masculinity hurts. Firstly, before we start talking about masculinity, I have to acknowledge that I come from a place of privilege. One of the ways in which I come from a place of privilege is that my country is very privileged. One of the things that make it privileged is that it is a rich country, and it has a rich and successful history of women's liberation movements. On this slide, we can, for example, see a picture from Kvennafríð, down on your right. That's from 1975, where Icelandic women went on strike for the day to demonstrate the indispensable work of women for Iceland's economy and society. So it's called the Women's Day Off in English, but it's estimated that around 90% of Iceland's female population participated in the strike. And the following year, the parliament passed a law guaranteeing equal pay for men and women. Then above that, we have Vigdís Finnbogadóttir. But on the 1st of August in 1980, she became the world's first democratically elected female president. And with a presidency of exactly 16 years, she also remains the longest serving elected female head of state in the country, in the world to date. And then we have a picture down on your left of Kvennalistinn, or the Women's Alliance, which was a feminist political party in Iceland that took part in national politics from 1983 to 1999. And they were a catalyst in getting issues that affected women into the political sphere and in increasing the percentage of women in the parliament. And all these things have continued today, and in many forms. For example, the Women's Day Off marches have been held regularly in Iceland, where women and their allies unite and march for such topics as to end gender violence and sexual harassment. So Iceland is pretty well situated regarding gender equality and how far we've come. In fact, so far that for the 11th year in a row, we're in the top position of the Global Gender Gap Index that the World Economic Forum presents each year, and has done so for over a decade. It measures these aspects in the 145 countries that are a part of it. It's political empowerment, economic participation and opportunity, health and survival, and educational attainment. And since 2009, we've been on top, like I say, which gives us very positive publicity around the world. We get news articles like this that show us as a beacon of hope for the world. If other countries in the world would just follow our lead, they would reach as far as we could in regards to gender equality. However, I would like to look at the scorecard that we get from the World Economic Forum, the gender report. This is the last one that we have. I don't know if, yeah, you can move my face around so you can see the numbers behind my face. Okay, so firstly, we have this here that tells us that Iceland is number 1 in the overall gender gap index. If we would have like parity between men and women in the country, we would have the score of 1. That is perfect equality in those 4 fields. But we haven't really reached equality here. We are at 0.877 points, which is still way better than most countries in the world. And we are way above a lot of countries. If we look at each field in itself, we can see that the economic participation and opportunity, we come in at 2nd place. Educational attainment, we are in 36th place. Health and survival, 123rd, is pretty low. And political empowerment, we come in 1st, even though that is in fact our lowest score. Interesting. We're going to look at it a bit more here. You can see that it's divided into further subcategories. We can see that there are some fields where we have gained perfect equilibrium, perfect equality, where we have the score of 1.0. That is how many women are professional and technical workers in relation to the percentage of men. And there we've actually got more women than men. You can see that number over there, 1.25, but we still scored as 1. And also where we have more women enrolled in tertiary education, that's universities, the ratio is actually very much skewed towards women. Over 70% of our university students are women. But nevertheless, we say that we have it down to equality. The score is 1. But in most other aspects, men are still like winning. They are in better positions. So even though we are the top country for equality in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, we still have quite a long way to go. If you look at this, can you see anything that is missing? Can you write down in our chat what isn't being measured that could seriously affect gender equality in our society? Is there anything that you see there that's missing? Another thing that I would like to point out, that is the health life expectancy in years. We're in the 133rd place, which seems very odd, but that has to do with how they measure what is a healthy balance between the life expectancy of men and women. And since men and women are quite close in age, this is like the average life expectancy of women, 73.8 years, and this is the average life expectancy of men, which is 72.3 years. And they actually think that this is too close. It should be with a wider gap. And since women are, well, men are actually living longer than in most other countries, it comes out as biased towards men, and therefore we are in the 133rd place. We have nothing, well, it doesn't measure paid paternity and maternity leave, but it has to do with economic participation and opportunity. There we see the impact of the paternity leave and the maternity leave. Disability payments difference by gender, it's not something that we have measured there. But what I think is more important is that they don't measure the second shift, for example, the workload at home, who takes care of the children, because we have like plethora of research on this subject that tells us all the same story. Men aren't picking up the slack. They've gotten a bit better in the last decades, but they're way behind their spouses. In fact, in the cases where men lose their job, the workload at home increases for their spouses instead of them actually doing more homework, work at home. Other things that this doesn't take into account, it doesn't talk about gendered violence at all. And this is actually something that foreign organizations have pointed out is a real problem here in Iceland. There is a persistent high rate of domestic violence and sexual abuse, and we have a justice system that remains very suspicious towards the victims of these abuses. And then there is the thing that strikes me as a bit odd. It seems that the gender equality is only measured in how far women have come, and where men are lagging behind, that isn't considered in the scorecard. So you see how men are getting less education than women. This seems to be not a problem, as Iceland turns up in the first place in that category. Interesting. All right. So we see that in most places, men are still the winner. They are in a privileged position in regard to women. We can say that they have a privileged position, but of course, not all men are in a privileged position, but men and women that are in a similar situation, the men are always a bit better positions. There are some issues that men are not benefiting from, and actually women seem to be doing a lot better in. And those are the issues that have been at the forefront of what we call the masculinity movements, or the men's movements. And we've seen organizations like these from the early 80s and the 90s. And they sort of counteract, they oppose the image of women being the ones that have it worse in society. They say their approach is that men are not in a privileged position, and that it's actually men that have it worse, and they need to get some help to gain better ground in the society. But there is quite a lot of diversity in the men's movements that have been around since the 80s. We have some men's movements that are actually pro-feminist and have been working with feminist movements, but then we have just like the louder group that is anti-feminist, and we're going to talk about them a little bit. Both the anti-feminist and the pro-feminist movements, they've been focusing more or less on these 5 issues. It's men and boys in education, and as we can see from the scorecard, we can see that men are not seeking higher education at the same rate as women, in Iceland at least. Then there is men's violence against women. The pro-feminist movements, they sort of talk about how men have to step up and do something about it, while the anti-feminist movement say, well, it's actually men that get the brunt of women's violence, and it's actually 50-50. Women are just as bad as men. And then it's men's health, that we're going to talk about a little bit, and fathers' rights, because, well, yeah, these are points that we're going to discuss a bit when we continue. Men in crisis and the crisis of masculinity is nothing new. We've seen this again and again and again. We have some writings from the ancient Greek where philosophers and politicians are writing about how the youth of today just are less of men than they used to be. We need to do something to toughen them up. For example, at the turn of the century, well, the turn of last century, around 1900, Baden-Powell, he got the Boy Scouts up and going, and the Boy Scouts were made because he had he was very worried that boys were growing up soft, that they didn't get to grow up on in nature, wrestling with the elements, wrestling with each other, and so on. So it was basically, his idea was to make like a baby version of an army. So everything that the Boy Scouts were in the beginning was modeled on the army. You can see it by the costumes and the decorum and how everything was set up. And this is something that he wrote about profusely in the beginning, because he didn't want boys to go soft. So now and again, we get this upsurge of worries where men say, what about the boys? What about men? Why are we always talking about women's rights and advancing women's position in society? And they call for action, they call for more actions for men. And it's interesting to see when the interest in men's position or men's rights, when they like strike peak interest in society. This is Google Analytics, and can you see when the searches, which month the searches spike about International Men's Day? Yeah, it's International Women's Day in March 8th. Does anyone know which day the International Men's Day is? The rest of the year? No, we have a special day, and it's next month, exactly a month from now. It's on the 19th of November. Yeah. So it's sort of like the only day that people are really interested in men's rights is when women get sort of the attention, and they say, what about Men's Day? When is that? Why don't we have that? And we actually have that, and it's next month. So we have all these different groups that have different and opposing perspectives on how to address the status of men. And we've seen them become more vocal and more prominent in news in the last few years. The focus is often on the issue of men in crisis and the crisis of masculinity. And there is there are some that are quite critical and have attacked feminism for restricting and taking away the rights of men and fathers. And a lot of the men in the men's rights movement are very angry. In the last few years, we've seen new movements emerging that are even more, shall we say, extreme than the ones that have been before. And they're often associated with the alternative right or the alt-right movements. And they have been described as isolationist, protectionist, anti-Semitic, white supremacist, and they've frequently been overlapping with neo-Nazism, nativism, Islamophobia, misogyny, and homophobia, and right-wing populism. The ideology is steeped in hyper-masculine visions of men and reinforces traditional gender roles and old-fashioned views of women. And we've seen that every time that there is a movement that comes from the feminist spectrum. For example, when the Me Too movement came along, we had the "Not All Men" hashtag trending as well. I don't know how it is in your countries, but we had other similar hashtags that were very local to Iceland, like Daddy Too, which was about fathers not having the rights to their children, and they sort of put it forward as counter Me Too movement, like men aren't all bad. Here's our Me Too movement, and it's Daddy Too. Okay, this is a part of a trend that we see in the world, and we've been seeing happening pretty much all over the place for the last decade or so. You know these guys. That's President Trump, and next to him is Steve Bannon. He used to be his right-hand man, and he used to have a medium called Breitbart, which was very right-wing fringe sort of medium. Then we have Jordan Peterson, which is in the academia, and he's been sort of complaining about how feminism has ruined academia, and that we have to turn academia back to its roots about, talking about men. And then we have politicians in Europe like Viktor Orban from Hungary and Jimmie Åkesson. He's in Sweden from the Swedish Demokraterna, Svenska Demokraterna. And they've actually become the largest party that's not in power in Sweden. And their discourse is all about that in the past we had greatness. In the past we had real men doing real things, and women knew their place, and minorities knew their place. And we just have to go back to the roots and make America great again. Make academia great again. Make Sweden great again. We even have men that are advocating for women to be great again. I've got some great news for you guys. This was the first one was last year, and sorry, I have bad news for you. You just missed the second one. They changed it to an online event in Orlando, Florida, and it was on the 2nd to the 4th of October. So you just missed it, but they probably have it next year. All right, but the discourse here is that women have just lost their way. Feminism is making everyone unhappy. Equality is something that is overrated. We should go back to how it used to be. You know, make women great again. This is also a part of it. We have seen in the last few years, young men especially, they think that equality has been achieved, and people that are striving for more gender equality are just, they've already gone too far. So this is a study that was done in the UK on young boys, and they say that feminism has gone too far. And this is very much in link with what we've seen here before. We've even seen ideas like this. This is a book that was published this year, by Eddie Scarry, who has published quite a few books, and he's a news reporter, and he had this great coverage. There was a great coverage in the Washington Examiner, I think it was last February, about his book, which is called Privileged Victims. And he actually argues, and I'm not making this up, that rape victims are the most privileged people in society today, whilst white heterosexual rich men are at the bottom of this theoretical pyramid. And he says that in America today and in Western society, we have a victim culture that has elevated the worst people, and the worst people being rape victims, to a position of imaginary privilege. So we have this notion of privilege that's just been turned 180 degrees upside down. So where does this idea come from? Like, is it because the people that he says are here at the bottom of this pyramid have lost some of their privilege, and we have been letting the people that used to scrape the bottom, they have a voice, and therefore just the feeling that they have a voice, that somebody's listening to them, suddenly that's just too much. So this is an extreme example, but this is in the mainstream media, and this is apparently the feeling of a lot of the men that have felt that they are being attacked for who they are, and they feel like they're losing ground. So I think they're just scared that the people that they have been just dismissing for the last centuries or millennium, that they're going to get on top and dismiss them as well, treat them as badly as they have treated these groups, which is not the case. We're talking here about equality, not payback. In regards to this, we have to talk about the manosphere. This is probably the most extreme things that you can get when we discuss masculinity. The Manosphere is a collection of websites, blogs, and online forums that promote some sort of masculinity. And the red thread here is hostility towards women, very strong opposition to feminism, and like extreme forms of misogyny. You might have heard the names of these groups before. Proud Boys, anyone that knows that name? It was in the news. I might have to step up just in a bit. There seems to be an alarm going on. Yeah. Okay, incels have been in the news, and Proud Boys have also been in the news because in the presidential debates where Trump and Biden met, what was it, a month ago? He was asked to like tell off or disown the white supremacist groups, and Trump asked like, which group should I tell to disown? And Biden said Proud Boys, and he said, yeah, Proud Boys, step down and wait, or something like that, to that effect. Wait for my say. Proud Boys are a very interesting, stand back and stand by. Thank you. They're very interesting phenomena, and they're mostly in America and Canada. And their notion is that men, exactly, like they're a backup army. Men have lost their way, women have lost their way as well. You should be proud of your heritage. You should be proud of being white, and and they've been linked to several instances of violence. I have to take a very short break.
While we wait, should we maybe write more in the chat and share what our thoughts are so far? What information do we have?
Sorry about that. That was the security system. I had to put in my numbers. Proud Boys, Red Pillars are more online. Proud Boys are actually meeting up in the real world, taking part in all sorts of activities and demonstrations in America and some in Canada. Red Pillars are more online, and they think that feminism has skewed how people see society. It's actually men that are oppressed and women are the oppressors, and women are actually in better positions in the society as a whole. I think we just looked at the numbers in Iceland. That is like #1 in gender equality, and I can say that the numbers do not back their worldview, but they probably say that it's a feminist agenda, and it's all just lies. Men going their own way, we can find them on forums online. This is men that have given up on women. They say that women have become so independent because of feminism that it's not possible to be in a relationship with women anymore. Good for them. PUA, or pickup artists, are also a community that you can mostly find online. And they sort of look at women as not as whole human beings, but more as objects to be conquered sexually. So pickup artist communities are all about spreading advices about how to get women to sleep with you. Well, how to trick women into sleeping with you. And then, women are just trash in their opinions. Incels, that's a short for involuntary celibates, and they're like an online subculture, and they define themselves as unable to find a romantic or sexual partner despite desiring one, a little bit like men going their own way, but this goes a step further. And they have all sorts of forums online, and they count in the tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands. And they have their own vocabulary that is used to define a rather inconsistent worldview, where all women belong to either the category of Stacies or Beckys. Stacies are desirable, Beckys are not. And all men are either Chads, which are men that all women, both Beckys and Stacies, want to sleep with, and normies, which is all other men, and incels are part of the normie group. All categories are loathed, but the women especially. Discussions in incel forums are often characterized by resentment, misogyny, misanthropy, self-pity and self-loathing, racism, a sense of entitlement to sex, and the endorsement of violence against sexually active people. There have been at least 6 mass murders, resulting in a total of 44 deaths that have been committed since 2014 by men who have either self-identified as incels or who have mentioned incel-related names and writings in their private writings or internet postings. So this is something that spills into the real world, even though it's an online community. Yeah, but this has been countered in the media as well, in society as well. It's not all just negativity. I hope that a lot of you have seen this ad. If not, I'm actually going to show it to you. This is from my YouTube. It doesn't want me to put in that. Let me see. One moment. Here we go.
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sexual harassment.
Masculinity.
Is this the best a man can get? Is it? We can't hide from it.
Sexual harassment is taking over.
It's been going on far too long. We can't laugh it off.
Who's the daddy?
What I actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment.
But she says
And there will be no going back. Because we believe in the best in men.
Men need to hold other men accountable.
Smile, sweetie.
Come on.
To say the right thing. to act the right way.
Bro, not cool, not cool.
Some already are. In ways big
Yo, men, we're acting like we all shit.
and small.
I am strong.
But some is not enough.
It's not how we treat each other, okay?
Because the boys watching today will be the men of tomorrow.
Okay. So this is an ad that Gillette made and was published on YouTube on the 14th of January in 2019. So almost 2 years ago. To date, it has more than 35 million views. The message is very clear. It's like a rejection of harmful masculinity. And I would say, I thought it was a very positive message. Yeah, moving, man stepping up, just getting rid of those old ideas of masculinity. So it surprised me to find out that it has 820,000 likes, like thumbs up, and 1.6 million thumbs down, dislikes. And the comment section is like a competition in who can be spouting the biggest masculinity statements and how they're never going to buy this this Gillette product again. So when Gillette asked, "Is that the best that a man can be?" A lot of men decided to say, "No, we can be worse." So we have all these old stereotypes about what men are supposed to be and how they are supposed to behave. And this is what we call the man box. And this has been looked into quite a lot. We have some research that can tell us quite a lot about the man box. Men are always supposed to be self-sufficient. They're supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be physically attractive with muscles, preferably, and handsome. They're supposed to follow those rigid masculine gender roles. They shouldn't do the dishes. They shouldn't tend to the babies. They shouldn't change diapers or do anything feminine. They should be heterosexual, very active, always ready to have sex, and they should show aggression and control at all times. But we've also seen that the men that adhere, that live by those rules of the man box, they have it quite hard. Promundo, which is an excellent organization that I recommend that you look into and follow. They've done a few researches around the globe about ideas of masculinity in all age groups of men. In 2017, they did this study in the United States, the United Kingdom, and in Mexico. And the results showed that young men between 18 and 30 years old feel pressure to live up to a restricted set of rules, those tough expectations, and that those rules cause real harm to those around them and to themselves. They could see that the boys, that the young men that that identified with these norms. They show strong statistical links to harmful masculine stereotypes and have measurable societal and economic costs. These young men are more prone to have traffic accidents. They are more likely to have suicidal thoughts and commit suicide. They're more likely to suffer from depression. They're more likely to be the perpetrators of sexual violence, to be the perpetrators of bullying, and be the ones that experience bullying, and be the perpetrators of violence and binge drinking. So, yeah, thanks. That's Promundo Global. That's there in the chat box there. We can also look at other statistics. The European Union has done quite a lot of research and gathered data about the health of European men. And we can see that there is a large gap there between men and women surrounding health. Men, for example, are way more prone to get into dangerous accidents. They account for about 70% of deaths by accident in Europe. About 75% of all deaths in Europe that are because of car accidents are men under the age of 25. And also, the suicide rates in Europe, men are 3 times more likely to take their own life than women. In America, it's 3.5. So there is growing concern about men and masculinity, the notion of masculinity, ideas of masculinity, and their lack of willingness to take care of themselves, to seek help, to take responsibility of their own health, and not fall into the man box and engage in those risk-taking behaviors that seem to be one of the rules of how to be a man. But it's a very valid question. Like, why do men not seek help? Why doesn't the society look at this ratio of men taking their own lives and declare a state of emergency and do something? Is it because we are stuck in the man box? Is it because we still believe that men are supposed to toughen up and not show their emotions? We have some research that tell us that boys cry about the same amount as girls until the age of 8 or 9, and then they're just told to stop. It's not acceptable anymore when boys cry. So they stop in fear of looking weak or feminine or gay, and they bury up those feelings. And then we end up with a generation of young men that have all these emotional problems, and they don't know how to discuss these things. And the suicide rates just, Which brings us back to the groups that we discussed before. The Danish researcher Christian Mogensen has said about these forums, the incels and so on, that they are in a way quite beautiful. That these are places for these men to bond. They may be bonding about being alone, but they're doing it together. There they find brotherhood, they find a sense of worth, they find some obtainable personal goals, agency through solidarity, and these forums have all the criteria to be able to transform into social and political movements. But unfortunately, it's just based on misogyny and self-hatred and has actually a more negative effect on the mental health of the participants than not. But we need something like these forums where men can come together, discuss their feelings in a more positive and healthy way. I like this quote from Audre Lorde. Men who are afraid to feel must keep women around them to do their feelings for them, while dismissing us for the same supposedly inferior capacity to feel deeply. But in this way also, men deny themselves their own essential humanity, becoming trapped in dependency and fear. I think this is something that a lot of men can relate to. And I think that we need to take the stigma away from expressing our feelings. Men have to take away the association with femininity and being afraid to connect with more feelings than just anger. Other things that we see that the man box does is it restricts men of doing what they could possibly be good at just because it's considered feminine. While women have gone into male-dominated professions increasingly in the last few decades, and they're doing quite well there, men haven't ventured in any decent rates into female-dominated professions. But we really need more men in those professions. These professions tend to be those that are absolutely necessary for the future of our societies. For example, the estimated global shortfall of nurses is around 9 million, but we don't see many men go into that direction. I found it quite amusing when I went to Malawi last year, and I saw that they were struggling to get more men into nursing. They were like trying to get more men by having all sorts of initiatives. And in Malawi, they have about 25% of the nurses that are men. And I found it like very amusing that they found that problematic. Would anyone care to guess what is the percentage of men in the nursing profession in Iceland? No, it's just slightly less than 3. Oh, 0.3. That's low. Not that low, but 3%, around 3%. So if you think 25% is a problem, I don't know where we are. But there is something positive. This might be the answer. We have seen a shift in ways that men think about masculinity. We have what has been termed inclusive masculinity. This was first written about by Erik Andersson in 2009 in a book called Inclusive Masculinity, and it has been elaborated on like a lot since then. There are increasingly spaces where men no longer need to behave in like this hyper masculine way to just to be accepted. And when this happens, men can engage in a variety of previously feminine practices or perceived feminine practices without the fear of being perceived weak or gay or whatever. So we see more and more men that are not afraid of being in touch with their emotions, and they emphasize warmth and caring, and they're not afraid of stepping out of the man box. And I think this is something that we have to nurture. One way to nurture this is through the paternity leave. And I think that all the research that has been done on paternity leave shows us that it has a tremendous effect on how men can become better persons. Men that have participated in the paternity leave, they participate more in the workload at home. And this is something that doesn't just stop after the paternity leave. This is an effect that continues after they have gone back to work. They also are more involved in their children's lives. They are more connected with their spouse. They also tend to live a healthier life. They are less prone to take risks, and they live longer. This is all just amazing. But of course, like not all men, not all fathers tend to go down this path, and it depends on how you approach this, because you can't do it with a very rigid, within the very rigid masculinity box. If you need an army outfit to feel manly in your upbringing, then you're doing something wrong. I'm sorry, but if you think that you have to have a manly man diaper bag, you're doing something wrong. All right. It's 4:07, so I'm just gonna tell you about a few sites that you can get some excellent information from that I can't recommend enough. This is an Australian blog that a scholar called Michael Flood has kept online for the last few years. It's called XY Online. I recommend that. He updates it regularly and has some excellent information on it. And then Promundo, that I've mentioned before, and they have quite a lot of research that are on their website. Then we have UN Women that have realized that we can't expect to reach gender equality if we only talk and include half of the human race. We need to include men. We need to include everyone, in fact. So on the UN Women website, you can find a lot of material as well. So I'm just gonna, this is like all from Promundo, all this excellent material on how to engage with men, all based on research. And then we get to this. Okay. I think we have to approach boys and men from an intersectional angle. And we have to, it is really a treasure box of resources. We have to approach them from an intersectional angle. And we have to be aware that this is not like a one size fits all. And they can have a very different experience coming into talking about gender issues and equality. We have to get them to look at their own world in a critical way. We have to get them to think about equality not just from some abstract place, but something that is very tangible in their surroundings. And we also have to get them to think about it self-critically. How does their own privileged position affect how they perceive gender equality? you do not always have to be in a privileged position, but you're definitely privileged in some way. So it's the issue at hand is to get them to see where they are privileged and to acknowledge that privilege and how can they use that privilege to make this a better place. And then I think we always have to be solution oriented. We have to think about how we can fix this. If we only talk about the bad stuff, then they don't see the solutions and they don't feel like they need to participate in making this a better world. Finally, this is something that I just ask you to have in mind. Always have the gender lens at hand, inspect the culture of institutions, peer culture, and everything really from the gender lens, and be conscious that you might have an unconscious bias towards the subject or persons that are discussing these things. Then I think we have to make sexual harassment and sexual violence unthinkable acts, something that no one could actually think of participating in, and you would just find unfathomable that anyone could do that. Then I think we should focus on men as whole human beings, with an emphasis on the role as caregivers. I think that is the way forward. That is where we can hook them in. And lastly, I think we should have gender studies for everyone. I think it's very important that everyone learns about how gender affects their daily lives and how they can be a part of dismantling the restrictions of the gender system, the old ideas of the man box. So that was my presentation, and I would like to invite some questions if you have any. You can use the chat box if you want. Could you share from your own personal experience? Has your journey been developing through the years with regard to this? I was brought up in a home where gender wasn't really an issue, and I was brought up where men and women could just do anything equally, and my role models, my male role models, they could do just whatever the women could do, and so on. So it actually quite surprised me when I was a teenager, and I realized that this was not the case with everyone. And I had a few years of just taking in all the sort of harmful masculinity stereotypes, and then at around 18 I sort of started rejecting them and seeing that this was not something that I thought was desirable. And when I turned 20, I started participating in activism, where men were grouping together and talking about men's issues and how they could be pro-feminists and how they could sort of push for a more gender equal world from their privileged position. And it has actually surprised me how we've gone through waves of periods when we see like steps being made forward, and then we see a backlash. And I'm guessing I'm becoming somewhat of an old timer in this regard, because I see the younger men that are starting just now, and they sort of think that they're doing something for the first time, but I'm realizing that I was not part of the first group, and we've seen waves like this before, and backlashes before, and I think that the pendulum just sort of edges us slowly towards a more equal society. How do you get middle-aged stereotypical manly men that who never talk about how they feel to start talking about their feelings? Well, I've gotten them through the fatherhood sort of hook. You know, but this is then just fathers, and the middle-aged men that are fathers, they love to talk about their children, and they sometimes have this need to talk about caregiving and how they approach the children and so on, but they don't necessarily have they've never really had the chance to do it. And from there, you can sort of hook them in to talk more about, their feelings and so on, because this is something that is, should be a part of a healthy upbringing, to be a role model in mental health as well. Feelings. Do you see any change in younger generations since you started teaching? Yep. I think that when I started teaching, feminism was considered somewhat of a dirty word, both with my female and male students. Today, we see most students, they at least know something about feminism. Most of the women, of the girls and young women, they actually identify as feminists. The men have not, the boys and the young men, they have not reached that far, and they haven't really thought about it as much. But they have had some connection with these issues through social media. Some of them have, for example, in our country, have been following an Instagrammer that's called Þorsteinn, and he has a Instagram account called Karlmennskan, and he has been very good at reaching the young people in regards to everything that regards to harmful masculinity, and has tried to get young boys especially to think about how they could have a healthier notion of masculinity. I've heard that the reason that women outnumber men in higher level education in Iceland is because men can easily get high-paying jobs without such a level of education. What are your thoughts on the reasons for men not being in university as much as women? Okay, we know that education, the statistics that we have from the Bureau of Statistics in Iceland, Hagstofan, is that education is something that benefits men more than women. That is, men that go into higher education, they have higher paychecks than women. But it's also that men that don't get that education are still more paid than the women that go into that leave after secondary education. So whatever men do, they still come out on top. They just don't need to go into that higher education to get the same paycheck as, well, they actually get higher pay than the women that go and seek further university education. So that's one thing. But it's also connected to what subjects women choose to go into. Or, they go into because we expect them to go into those professions. For example, nursing and teaching are at a university level, but you don't see many men going to nursing or education. And basically because it doesn't, end up in their paycheck. We still very much see men as the breadwinners. It's a very persistent view of the roles of men and women. That men are supposed to earn more than their spouses, and it's very, very slow in changing. More than, I think it was something close to 75% of young men in America think that they should have higher wages than their wife. So that is also something that affects this. Why do you think this is such an issue that men should have higher wages? This comes from the first time that we had this clear division between the home and the workplace. This comes from when we had the first big towns and cities. The patriarchy, that the father should be the head of the household, and one way to be the head of the household was to bring in the bacon. So women should stay at home, they should tend to the family, they should offer offspring, offer a warm meal when they got home, a clean home, and so on. And the only role that the man had was to protect their family and bring home the paycheck. Which is, of course, a very lonely existence. How do we facilitate the discussion so it reaches more men and a broader audience? How do we reach the people so that these 4 things change? Well, we can use all the platforms that we have. I do this by teaching. I take the opportunity when I get to talk to a broader audience like this one. And I encourage other institutions and schools and so on to do this. I also write material for people to use. I've been trying to get more schools to take this up as a subject, gender studies. This is something that has to be addressed. And you know, it's so funny that there is people really want to discuss these things, and if you offer them a venue to do that, they will arrive and they will talk about these things and they will share their feelings. But the problem is that you have to have it, based on some facts. You could get like a group of men's rights activists that are like that think that men have it way worse than women, or you could even have like men that hate women. So you have to be sort of careful about who gets to run the platform and who gets to manage the discussions. A few years ago, me and a few friends, we had a monthly night at a local pub where we talked about men and masculinities and equality. And every time we had a full house of people and that were just eager to talk. Of course, during COVID times, that's not possible. But I think that you could probably make something like this online as well. Would I like to tell the audience about my research that the media picked up with Gusto? It takes way too much time. I think I'll save that for a later date. Nylander, what is the link between toxic masculinity and right-wing politics? I can clearly see this behavior in right-wing politics. Why? Is it because leftists tend to have higher education? That's it. That's a very hard question. Of course, the left, by definition, wants to move in newer directions, to try something new, while right-wing tends to be more conservative and wants to look into the past for inspiration and stability. So it's quite normal for the right to hang on to these old ideas, or even want to go back to when masculinity was great. But higher education, yeah, probably a bit of that as well. Okay, I think we have had enough time to discuss, or have you got? Okay, I think we have reached our limit, and I want to thank you for your ears and your questions, and I hope you have learned something new today.